There's been a debate for years now. Does cannabis cause schizophrenia or increase the risk of schizophrenia? Or does it just produce schizophrenia in people who are going to get it anyway, or in vulnerable people? And so it's been going on for years. And I think the consensus is that cannabis, there is a cause and effect relationship with schizophrenia, but it's still debated. There's been a natural experiment in Canada where Canada initially legalized medical use of cannabis, was one of the first countries to do so, and then legalized non-medical use, recreational use. And so there are dates, we know the year that these changes occurred, and therefore they were able to measure the effects of it. So in Ontario, where they've got very good health records, they've looked at the health records of about 13.5 million people to see what the diagnosis rate of schizophrenia was during those periods before legalization, after legalization, and looked at other things such as psychosis, in other words, delusional beliefs and behavior, which might not qualify for the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And what they showed was that after a little bit more context here, the most potent mind-changing element of cannabis is THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. And in the old days, in the 60s, when people were smoking joints at Woodstock, etc., the level of THC was a fraction of what it is today. So the cannabis that people are consuming is very potent, and THC is thought to be the causative element. Anyway, what's happened since legalization is, and there's been a recent paper on this, is that cannabis use disorder has increased in Canada to the extent that people are turning up in emergency departments with problems associated with their cannabis, addiction, dependence, and sometimes psychological effects as well. And what they've shown is that there's a relationship between cannabis use disorder and schizophrenia. So if you've got it, you've increased your risks of schizophrenia, and there's been more cannabis use disorder since legalization. So the rate of schizophrenia in relation to cannabis use has actually gone up. It's tripled over that period of time. Now, something odd has happened in the statistics, which is, just to be fair to people watching our conversation, is that overall in Ontario, the rate of schizophrenia has not gone up. So in other words, there's still the same number of people with schizophrenia, but that's thought to be a problem, not a problem, an issue where older people don't seem to be diagnosed quite as much as younger people. But putting that to one side, it is worrying that there's this relationship. But what does increase overall, so the overall numbers of schizophrenia hasn't increased, even though the relationship between cannabis use disorder and schizophrenia, both have gone up together, is the rate of psychosis. And you've got an almost doubling of the rate of psychosis in Ontario since legalization of cannabis. So in other words, that's delusional behavior, which might one day end up as being schizophrenia, or may just be one or two troubling episodes. The issue here is not necessarily being against legalization of cannabis. It's more that when you legalize a substance, there's usually a price to pay. And you've just got to understand what that price might be, so you have public health campaigns to warn people cannabis is not a harmless substance.
So did those also who developed cannabis-linked conditions share any common traits, any common backgrounds?
Well, that's a very good question, because that plagues cannabis research. And you and I a few months ago spoke about cannabis research which looked at the effect on schooling, on brain development and so on. And when you remove the effects, like the people who tend to have problems with cannabis tend to be lower income, not have completed education, in other words, are in poorer circumstances, that affects the story as well, and they're not necessarily being well controlled for. So yes, that could be an influence, but it's such a large study that you think that would wash out in this study.